They thought they could humiliate me by giving my hard-earned bonus to the CEO's spoiled son. 3 weeks later, that same golden boy lost millions, and I made sure everyone knew exactly why. I still remember the exact moment my stomach sank. The office smelled faintly of burnt coffee, the kind that had been sitting on the warmer too long, and the hum of the overhead lights was the only sound filling the room. I was staring at an email on my computer screen, reading it over and over, again, trying to make sense of the words. This year's bonus will be awarded to Michael Parker for his outstanding contributions. Michael Parker, the CEO's son? I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and read it again. No mention of me. No mention of the countless late nights I had spent bent over spreadsheets, the weekends sacrificed, or the clients I had personally kept from walking away when our company was struggling. Just Michael Parker, who couldn't even spell spreadsheet the right way the last time I checked. At first I thought it had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe my name was missing due to an oversight. Or maybe the announcement was a draft that hadn't been finalized. I scrolled back up, checked the sender, checked the distribution list, and checked everything. But no, it was real. They had taken my bonus, the reward I had been quietly counting on to pay down some debts and finally take my wife on the vacation I'd been promising her, and handed it to the boss's son on a silver platter. My chest tightened with anger. My mind raced back over the past year. The contract I had negotiated that saved the company nearly $5 million. The vendor relationship I had salvaged after Michael nearly blew it with his arrogance, and the detailed reports that had guided the board's decision to expand into 2 new markets. Every major success our department had claimed bore my fingerprints. And yet, when it came time to acknowledge effort, loyalty, and results, I was invisible. Invisible to everyone, except to Michael. The kid had swaggered around the office for months, acting like he was untouchable. He'd show up late, cut corners, and brag about how things just came naturally to him. Everyone knew he didn't actually do anything of value. He sat in meetings doodling on his tablet, then claimed ownership of projects that other people had sweated over. But of course, nobody dared call him out. He was the CEO's son, untouchable, or so he believed. That day, as I sat in my chair staring at that email, something inside me snapped. I had given over a decade of my life to this company. I had tolerated the politics, the unfair promotions, and the favoritism because I thought naively that merit would eventually speak louder than connections. But now, watching my reward slip into the hands of someone who hadn't earned it, I realized the truth. Merit meant nothing here. Loyalty meant nothing here. The only thing that mattered was bloodline, and if they were going to play dirty, I decided, then so would I. At first, my anger was a storm without direction. I imagined marching into the CEO's office and demanding an explanation. I fantasized about quitting on the spot, slamming my resignation letter on the desk, and watching their faces as they realized how much they depended on me. But that wasn't revenge. That was just giving them exactly what they wanted. My silence and my absence. Real revenge would be slower, smarter, surgical. I didn't want them to just feel my loss. I wanted them to suffer the weight of their own arrogance. I wanted them to look at Michael and realize that protecting him had cost them everything. The opportunity came faster than I expected. About 2 weeks after the bonus announcement, Michael was given his first big responsibility. A major contract negotiation with one of our overseas partners. The deal was worth tens of millions, the kind of negotiation that could make or break our quarterly numbers. I had handled the preliminary work myself, laying the foundation, smoothing the relationship, and drafting the initial terms. I knew the ins and outs of the deal like the back of my hand, and yet, at the last moment, I was told to step aside. Michael needs to learn, the CEO said, smiling like this was all some noble mentorship exercise. He's young, but he has the instincts. I bit my tongue. Instincts. The only instincts Michael had were for sniffing out which bar had the best happy hour. But I nodded, because what else could I do? Outwardly, I was calm. Inwardly, my mind was racing. This was my chance. See. What the CEO didn't realize was that real contracts, the kind worth tens of millions, are built on tiny, almost invisible details. A single overlooked clause can mean the difference between profit and catastrophe. And Michael, arrogant as he was, had no patience for details. So when he called me into his office, shoving the draft across his desk and saying, "Hey, just skim this and tell me it's fine," I smiled. I smiled because I already knew how this story was going to end. I leaned over the document, scanning it carefully, and there it was. A clause buried halfway down, written in the driest legal language possible. It was a trap clause, one I had flagged weeks earlier when negotiating with their legal team. I had already prepared a counter, but Michael hadn't noticed it. He hadn't even bothered to read. Looks fine, I said, straightening up. Great. Michael grinned, slapping the desk like he'd just conquered something. I'll sign it in the morning. And that was it. The beginning of the end. I walked out of his office that day with a strange calm in my chest. The rage I'd felt when they stole my bonus had crystallized into something colder, sharper. I didn't need to scream or quit or beg for fairness. All I needed to do was let Michael's incompetence speak for itself. And when it did, the fallout would make my stolen bonus look like pocket change. I went home that night and kissed my wife and told her not to worry about the bonus. We'll be fine, I said. And for the first time, I actually believed it. Because deep down, I knew the real payback hadn't even started yet. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The sun had barely cleared the skyline, and the city still carried that quiet, fragile calm that only lasts a few minutes before the rush begins. I sat at my desk, sipping coffee, waiting for the inevitable. Michael strolled in around 10, sunglasses perched on his head, tie slightly askew as if it had been an afterthought. He looked like someone who had stumbled into the wrong building but decided to play along. People greeted him with the usual fake enthusiasm smiles that never reached their eyes. Compliments laced with silent contempt. He basked in it, oblivious to the fact that every nod was hollow. I watched him from across the room as he strutted toward the conference area, the contract folder tucked carelessly under his arm. He was humming of all things. Humming, like this was just another item on his to-do list, no different from checking emails or grabbing lunch. I couldn't help but think, this is the man they gave my bonus to. The meeting began with the usual pleasantries. Representatives from the overseas partner company joined us via video conference, their polished smiles betraying nothing. I had dealt with them before. I knew how sharp they were, how carefully they measured every word. They were sharks in tailored suits, and Michael was bleeding in the water. Let's move forward with the final draft, Michael said confidently, flipping open the folder. He tapped the pages with a pen, glancing at me briefly as if expecting approval. I kept my face neutral, my hands folded neatly in my lap. He signed the contract with a flourish, sliding it across the table like he'd just brokered peace between nations. The representatives on the screen exchanged quick glances, tiny flickers of satisfaction that Michael was too blind to notice. They smiled, thanked him, and ended the call. The room emptied out, leaving Michael and me. He leaned back in his chair, grinning from ear to ear. Not bad for my first big deal, huh? He said. I forced a smile. Not bad at all. Inside, I was already imagining the storm that was about to hit. It didn't take long. 3 days later, the first ripples appeared. An email from the finance department, urgent and marked high priority. Then another from legal asking for clarification on the signed terms. Then a meeting request from the CFO, tone clipped and serious. By the end of the week, the entire building was buzzing. Whispers in the hallways, tense faces in the break room, hurried footsteps up and down the stairwells. Something had gone terribly wrong, and everyone knew it. The clause Michael had overlooked, my little gift to him, shifted liability in a way that exposed the company to massive costs. Overnight, what should have been a profitable expansion turned into a financial black hole, tens of millions at risk, maybe more once penalties and damages are factored in. I watched the panic unfold like a spectator at a play. Executives huddled behind closed doors, their voices raised, their tempers short. Department heads scrambled to minimize damage, digging through paperwork and firing off desperate emails. And at the center of it all was Michael, suddenly very quiet. His swagger was gone. He stopped humming. He stopped smiling. He stopped meeting people's eyes in the hallway. One afternoon, I walked past his office and saw him sitting alone, staring at the contract like it might somehow rewrite itself. If he glared hard enough, his tie was loosened and his jacket was tossed carelessly on the floor. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked small. That should have been enough for me. Seeing him squirm, watching the golden boy wilt under pressure, that alone was satisfying. But revenge, real revenge, isn't just about watching someone stumble. It's about making sure they fall so hard they never recover. And Michael wasn't done falling yet. The board called an emergency meeting. Everyone filed into the conference room, the air thick with tension. I took a seat near the back, quiet and observant. Michael sat at the front, flanked by his father, the CEO. He looked pale, his usual arrogance replaced by a nervous twitch in his jaw. The CFO laid it out plainly. The contract was a disaster. The clause Michael had overlooked would cost the company millions. He explained the consequences in detail, each word landing like a hammer on Michael's shoulders. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their eyes narrowing, their patience thinning. Then one of them asked the question that hung in the air like a guillotine: who reviewed this contract before it was signed? Silence. Michael opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes flicked to me for the briefest moment, and I knew what he was thinking. He wanted to blame me. He wanted to say I had seen it, that I had given him the green light. But he couldn't, not without admitting he hadn't read a word of it himself. The CEO cleared his throat. Michael was in charge of this negotiation. It was his responsibility. The words were meant to sound supportive, but the undercurrent was clear. Responsibility also meant accountability. The board murmured scribbled notes and exchanged looks. For the first time, Michael's shield, his father's protection, wasn't enough. After the meeting, I lingered in the hallway pretending to check my phone as Michael stormed past. His face was red, his hands clenched into fists. He slammed his office door shut so hard the glass rattled. I smiled to myself. The first crack in his armor had become a fracture. Soon it would shatter completely. Over the next week, the fallout grew worse. The partner company, sensing weakness, pushed harder on their advantage. Legal fees mounted, investors grew restless. The company's stock price dipped, whispers of incompetence spreading like wildfire. And through it all, Michael was the common thread, the one who had signed the deal, the one whose name was on every document. People started talking. Not just whispers anymore, but open complaints. Why was he even put in charge? He doesn't know what he's doing. If this had been handled by someone competent, we wouldn't be in this mess. Every word was a dagger, and every dagger found its mark. I stayed quiet, invisible, just as I had been when they stole my bonus. But this time my invisibility was a weapon. While Michael flailed in the spotlight, I remained in the shadows, untouched. UNTARNISHED. One evening, as I packed up to leave, I overheard two executives in the hallway. The CEO's going to have to make a choice. One of them said, "Between what?" The other asked, "Between his son and the company." I didn't need to hear more. That was all I wanted. For the man who had stolen my recognition, my reward, and my dignity to be the reason his father had to sacrifice everything he'd built. For once, Michael Parker was no longer untouchable. He was vulnerable, exposed, and I wasn't done yet. Because now, I had the leverage. SEC3 the following week felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. Everyone in the company could see it happening, but no one could look away. Michael had gone from being the golden boy to the problem child almost overnight, and the shift in the office atmosphere was impossible to ignore. The once friendly smiles he received had soured into tight-lipped nods. Colleagues who used to laugh at his terrible jokes now avoided him in the hallways. Even the assistants, who had always been polite out of obligation, began treating him with the kind of cold efficiency usually reserved for strangers. And me, I kept my distance. Not too far, though. Just enough that he could still see me in his peripheral vision. Composed and unbothered. I wanted him to remember that I had been right there when he signed that contract. I wanted him to wonder whether I had seen it, whether I had let him walk into the trap on purpose. That seed of doubt was almost as satisfying as the chaos itself. The breaking point came during a quarterly investor meeting. It was one of those high-stakes events where every number, every projection, and every word carried weight. Investors don't like surprises, and thanks to Michael, we had delivered them. A very expensive one. The room was tense before the meeting even began. I sat in the back, notebook in hand, ready to take notes if anyone asked. Michael sat at the front beside his father, looking like a man headed for execution. The CFO gave the presentation, outlining the financial hit we had taken from the contract. Numbers flashed on the screen, red where they should have been green. Gasps and mutters spread through the room as investors leaned toward each other, whispering urgently. Then came the questions. How did this happen? One demanded. Who approved these terms? Another pressed. The CEO shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But before he could answer, one of the board members cut in sharply. We were told Michael Parker handled this deal. All eyes turned to Michael. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Then tried to force a smile. It was an oversight. A minor detail we can work through. Minor. The CFO's voice cracked like a whip. This minor detail has already cost us millions in penalties. By the end of the quarter, it could be tens of millions more. The room erupted into overlapping voices, with investors shouting, board members demanding answers, and the CEO trying to calm the storm. Michael sat frozen, pale, and sweating, his hands gripping the table so tightly his knuckles turned white, and I sat in the back, watching it unfold, my expression carefully blank. Inside, I was savoring every second. That night, Michael didn't leave the office until long after dark. I stayed late too, pretending to finish up some work, but really, I was waiting. As I passed by his office on my way out, I saw him hunched over his desk, head in his hands. Empty coffee cups littered the surface. His tie was loose, and his hair was disheveled. He looked up when I tapped lightly on the doorframe. His eyes were bloodshot, his face drawn. "What do you want?" he muttered. "Just checking in," I said smoothly. "Rough day, huh?" He laughed bitterly. "You think—" I stepped inside, lowering my voice. "You know, Michael, these things happen. Contracts are complicated, easy to miss the fine print." He stared at me, suspicion flickering. In his gaze, "Did you know about that clause?" I held his eyes steadily. "If I had, I would have told you it was a lie, of course. But the beauty of a well-placed lie is that it feeds exactly what the other person wants to believe." And Michael wanted needed to believe that his downfall wasn't orchestrated, that it was just bad luck. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Dad's furious. The board's ready to kill me. If this doesn't get fixed, I'm done." I shrugged lightly. "Maybe there's a way to fix it." His eyes snapped back to mine, desperate now. "You think so?" "Maybe," I said, letting the word hang in the air. "But it would take someone who knows the details inside and out. Someone the board actually trusts." I didn't have to say more. The implication was clear, and for the first time since this mess began, Michael looked at me not with arrogance, but with something resembling respect, or maybe fear. Either way, it was exactly what I wanted. Over the next few days, I became his reluctant lifeline. He started coming to me quietly, asking for advice, asking me to review documents, and asking me how to handle conversations with the executives. I gave him just enough to keep him afloat, never enough to let him recover completely. He was drowning, and I was the one handing out teaspoons of air. The irony was delicious. The same man who had taken my bonus, who had been handed credit for work he didn't do, was now leaning on me for survival, and he knew it. Every time he came to me, his pride shrank a little more. Meanwhile, the company's troubles grew worse. Our competitors caught wind of the situation and began circling. Like vultures, clients grew nervous, threatening to pull out of deals. The press got hold of whispers about leadership incompetence, and headlines started appearing that questioned the CEO's decision-making, and still, through it all, I kept my head down, steady and reliable. The one person who wasn't panicking, the one person quietly getting things done. It was during one of these quiet evenings, when Michael slumped in his chair across from me, that I realized just how far he had fallen. "They hate me," he said flatly. "The board, the investors, the employees, everyone. I can feel it. I didn't deny it. Respect is earned, Michael, not given." He laughed hollowly. "Easy for you to say. You're the golden employee now. Everyone trusts you. Everyone listens when you talk." I tilted my head, studying him. Funny how that works, isn't it? A year ago, I was invisible. Now, I let the sentence trail off, but the meaning was clear. Now, the tables had turned. For a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Then he leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just don't let me sink, okay?" I smiled faintly, almost kindly. "Of course, Michael, I wouldn't dream of it." But in my mind, I knew the truth. He was already sinking. I was just making sure he drowned slowly enough to understand exactly how it felt to be powerless, and when the final wave came crashing down, he would remember that I was the one standing on shore watching. The real collapse began with the annual shareholder conference. It was the event of the year, the one where the CEO showcased the company's triumphs, projected confidence about the future, and convinced everyone in the room that their investments were safe. This year was different. The grand ballroom was filled with polished suits and practiced smiles. But beneath the surface, tension crackled like static. Investors had already read the quarterly report. They knew about the losses. They wanted answers. I sat at one of the back tables, surrounded by middle managers and department heads. I didn't need to be up front to feel the unease in the air. All I had to do was glance at Michael, who sat beside his father on the stage, pale and rigid. His tie was perfect, his hair styled, but nothing could hide the way his hands clenched nervously in his lap. The CEO took the podium first, giving his usual speech about innovation and resilience. But when he moved to the numbers, the murmurs began. Investors leaned forward, brows furrowed. The polite smiles hardened into suspicion. Then it was time for questions. "Mr. Parker," one man called, his voice sharp, "your report shows a substantial financial hit from a recent contract. Who approved those terms?" The CEO hesitated, glanced at his son, then forced a smile. "Our executive team handled negotiations. Specifically, the man pressed. Was it Michael Parker?" The room stilled. Michael cleared his throat, his voice thin. "I was part of the process." "Yes, but part of it." Another investor interrupted, "or leading it. Because my understanding is that you were the one who signed." Michael stammered, words tumbling over themselves. The CEO tried to step in, but the questions came faster, sharper, How did such a costly oversight slip through? Was this incompetence or negligence? Why should we trust this leadership moving forward? The heat in the room was suffocating. Michael's face turned blotchy red, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked out at the sea of accusing eyes and, for the first time, truly seemed to understand that no one was going to protect him, not even his father, because when the CEO finally spoke, his voice carried not defense but disappointment. Mistakes were made serious ones, and they will be addressed. The message was clear. Michael was no longer shielded. By the end of the conference, whispers were everywhere. Investors left with grim expressions, some shaking their heads. The press, who had been politely taking notes earlier, now scribbled. Furiously eager for tomorrow's headlines, that night, the company group chat lit up with speculation. Screenshots of tweets, snippets of conversations, and anonymous comments from sources close to the situation. Michael's name was everywhere, linked with words like failure, liability, and nepotism gone wrong. The Golden Boy had turned into a cautionary tale. I should have felt satisfied, and I did partly, but there was more work to be done. The next morning, I walked into the office to find Michael already there, slumped in his chair, his phone buzzing nonstop. He looked like he hadn't slept. Dark circles under his eyes, shirt wrinkled, jaw tight. They're killing me. Out there, he muttered as I passed his office. I paused and leaned against the doorframe. Tough week. He glared at me, the last remnants of pride flickering in his eyes. Don't pretend you don't enjoy this. I tilted my head, giving him a half smile. Enjoy it. No, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't see it coming. His glare softened into something closer to desperation. What do I do? Tell me what to do. And there it was. The final surrender. I stepped into his office, lowering my voice. If you want to survive this, you need to stop scrambling. You need to act like you're in control, Levin. If you're not, show the board you're steady. Make the employees think you're still worth following. He leaned forward, and how do I do that? I let the silence stretch, then answered carefully. You lean on the people who can still salvage your reputation. The ones who know the work, the ones they trust. He swallowed hard, nodding. You mean you? I didn't correct him. The following days were almost surreal. Michael began parroting my suggestions word for word in meetings. He copied my phrasing, my tone, and even my posture. At first, people noticed. They raised eyebrows and exchanged knowing glances. But after a while, it just became pathetic background noise, other reminder that he was in over his head. The irony was rich. He had taken my bonus, my credit, and my recognition. Now he was borrowing my voice to try and survive. And the more he did it, the more obvious it became to everyone that he was nothing without someone else propping him up. It didn't take long for the board to reach their decision. 2 weeks after, the shareholder conference and emergency meeting was called. Only senior executives were invited, but news travels fast in offices like ours. By the end of the day, everyone knew the outcome. Michael Parker had been stripped of his executive authority officially. He was reassigned to a lower role, a quiet demotion meant to save the family's dignity. Unofficially, he was finished. His emails stopped carrying weight. His calls went unanswered. His office, once a hub of power, became a ghost town, and I was promoted. Quietly, without ceremony, but decisively. The CEO himself pulled me aside, his expression weary but resolute. You've been steady through all of this, he said. We need people like you, people who know what they're doing. I accepted with a nod, though inside I was laughing, because this was the real revenge. Not shouting, not gloating, not rubbing his nose in it. The real revenge was watching him sink while I rose. Knowing that everyone saw the truth now. Michael's downfall wasn't just a stumble. It was a lesson carved into the company's memory. Arrogance, without substance, will always collapse. And I had been the quiet hand guiding it all along. The weeks that followed were some of the strangest of my career. For years, Michael had been this looming figure strutting through the office with his entitled smirk, throwing his weight around and collecting praise he hadn't earned. Now he was a shadow. He still came in every morning and still sat at his desk, but the difference was stark. His phone barely rang. His inbox, once overflowing with requests and meetings, sat quiet. Colleagues who used to crowd around him now walked past without a glance. Even the interns who once scrambled to impress him gave him only polite nods before moving on. The silence around him was its own kind of punishment. And, I'll admit it, I savored it. Not in a petty way, not in the sense of gloating, but in the deeper satisfaction of justice being restored, because this wasn't just about a bonus. It was about years of being overlooked, about loyalty being taken for granted, and about hard work being brushed aside so a spoiled heir could play executive now. Everyone could see what I had known all along. Without power handed to him, Michael was ordinary. Worse than ordinary, he was incompetent. One afternoon, I passed his office and found him sitting there, staring at a blank screen. His tie was loosened, his shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked, his ajour maybe older. The weight of humiliation does that to a person. Need something? I asked. Casually pausing at the door, he blinked up at me, dazed. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, throw one last insult and cling to the scraps of his pride. But all he said was, "How did it all go so wrong?" I gave him the answer he didn't want, but needed to hear. Because you never respected the people around you. You thought titles and bloodlines made you untouchable, but respect isn't given, it's earned, and you never earned it. He looked away, unable to hold my gaze. I didn't wait for a response. Word spread quickly that Michael would be leaving the company altogether. Everyone knew better. His father may have orchestrated a graceful exit, but the truth was clear. Michael Parker had been forced out. The morning he cleared his desk, the office buzzed with whispers. People watched discreetly from their cubicles as he carried out a single box of belongings. No farewell speech, no applause, no send-off, just quiet footsteps fading down the hall. I watched too from my office window, and I felt peace. Not triumph, not cruelty. Just peace. Because revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is exposure, the truth laid bare for everyone to see. He had tried to strip me of dignity by stealing my reward, but in the end, it was his own dignity that crumbled. A week later, the CEO called me in again. His tone was different this time, not weary, but respectful. "You've shown resilience, and more importantly, you've shown results," he said. "I know things have been rocky, but we want you to take on a senior leadership role. The team trusts you. I trust you." It wasn't just a promotion. It was validation, a recognition that my years of effort had not been in vain. That integrity and persistence could outlast arrogance and entitlement. That evening, as I left the building, I paused in the lobby. The glass doors reflected the city lights, the traffic rushing by, and the hum of a world that never stopped moving. I thought about the man I had been when this all started. The one who sat stunned in a conference room as his bonus was handed to someone who hadn't earned it. I barely recognized that man anymore, because through all of this, I hadn't just gotten even, I had grown stronger. And the next time someone thought they could silence me, dismiss me, or take what was mine, they would remember the story of Michael Parker, the golden boy who lost millions overnight. The heir who thought he was untouchable. The cautionary tale that proved revenge doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be just. And with that, I walked out into the night, ready for whatever came next.